Thursday, June 9th, 2022. The time is now 6:30 p.m. and I will like to open our meeting of the School Board of Education for District 191. I'd like to welcome everybody here present tonight, as well as those watching online. Director Werb, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we begin, Director Alt, who is our clerk, is absent today, and so we are going to appoint Director Connor as clerk this evening. So I would like to seek a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Director Werb.
Second.
Second by Director Miller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next, I'm going to walk down there. We have a lot to celebrate this evening. This is one of our exciting times of the year as members of the school board because we get to attend all these wonderful graduations, celebrate all our amazing students and our community and our athletes, and tonight is no different. So our first recognition tonight is for our student representative, Zoe Olson, for her service to this board, to Burnsville High School, and to District 191 as a whole. Throughout the years, Zoe has helped me and this entire board stay informed and connected to the happenings at Burnsville High School through her regular reports, and more importantly, she's helped us understand the feelings and morale of the student body, sharing emotional highs as well as lows as events unfolded. I can't express how much this board has valued Zoe's perspective and the honesty and bravery for which she shared it. I know that she's met regularly with Superintendent Battle over this year, as well as that those have been important for Dr. Battle because she knows how important it is to hear a student voice as she makes decisions about our schools. Of course, Zoe has provided leadership outside of her role as student representative, and we'll hear a little more about that in our next agenda item. But I wanted to note her involvement in so many student leadership organizations, including the National Honor Society, Student Council, Burnsville Strong, Link Crew, and the Youth Service Advisory Council. And I understand that she'll be attending Dartmouth College in New Hampshire next year with plans to major in government and eventually pursue a career in law. Zoe, I can't thank you enough for being a part of the board this year. I think I speak for everybody here. How fortunate we have been to get to know you a little better, and we are so proud of you and so excited to see you continue on your journey. Congratulations, Zoe. And we have this card for you, and we'll ask if board members have other comments. Any other comments from our fellow board members? Go ahead.
I'll just say thank you. It's been great having you this year, having you share your experiences at the high school and help us stay a little bit more connected. That's been really great, especially after last year where our student rep had to be virtual the whole year. So it was nice to have you actually physically with us as well. So thank you, and best of luck to you in the future.
Dr. Werb?
Yeah, I also wanted to say thank you, Zoe. I know there were some emotional highs and some emotional lows this year, and I think you handled yourself very eloquently and very much appreciated your reports. Thank you.
Director Miller?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zoe. You've done an excellent job. This is a role that can be somewhat intimidating, and we understand that. You took it on with gusto. You clearly are going to go places. Thank you very much.
And we'll continue on with Zoe here in just a second. The other thing that we'll be celebrating tonight is the 2022 Coskran Award winners. It is my pleasure to introduce and say a few words about each of this year's John Coskran Volunteer Award winners. This is the 20th year of the awards being given out. They are named in honor of John Coskran, a longtime advocate for volunteerism who served 34 years at Catholic Charities and retired as Associate Director in 1993. Mr. Coskran also had served as a board member of District 191. And we'll start with our own student representative, Zoe. Zoe is a senior at Burnsville High School. Just this year, she's volunteered more than 150 hours of service through the school's youth service program. She's a leader in several school clubs, including the National Honor Society, through which she has helped build and sustain the Blaze Nation Station, which helps ensure students have access right on campus to necessities like hygiene supplies and clothing. Zoe was nominated by BHS Youth Service Coordinator Courtney Floback. Courtney says that she's seen Zoe grow tremendously over the past year and a half in terms of her service to others, as well as her academic accomplishments, civic responsibilities, and leadership. She wrote, Zoe has dedicated her spare time to improving the lives of her classmates, herself, and the city of Burnsville, and added that she has determination to be a force for positive transformation in the world. Congratulations, Zoe, and thank you for being a great example through leadership and youth service. Next, I'd like to invite Laura Shrank to the podium. Laura is a former teacher and now a community member volunteer for our Adult Basic Education program, who had a wonderful ceremony last night. Thanks to her teaching background, she brings an incredible amount of experience, knowledge, and understanding of our students' needs to the beginning of English classroom where she volunteers. She helps students gain an understanding of new vocabulary and helps them practice their listening, speaking, writing, and reading language skills. According to ABE Program Coordinator Susan Edmondson, who nominated Laura, she is patient, dedicated, and passionate about helping students learn English. This year, because there has been an increased need for some substitute teachers, Laura has even been willing to be a substitute when needed, and Susan says that her students love learning from her and are excited to attend when she's here. Thank you, Laura, for sharing your expertise, talents with our staff and students. You make an incredible difference in their lives. Congratulations. Next, I'd like to invite Pat and John Christensen to the podium. Pat and John have supported District 191 and the 191 community in many ways over the years. Having been nominated for their work with Foundation 191, though I'm going to focus on that tonight, Pat serves as Burnsville High School Community Scholarship Program Chairperson, leading the scholarship committee and facilitating more than 100 scholarship awards totaling upwards of $130,000, given to more than 80 BHS seniors seeking post-secondary education. This year, she worked with about 40 community donors to connect their scholarship donations with deserving students. She spends hundreds of hours throughout the scholarship season organizing, planning, and communicating leading up to the scholarship award ceremony, which was held on May 18th of this year. Though that work really culminates when students head to school next fall with part of their tuition or other expenses already paid for. And John serves as board's treasurer and has worked diligently with accounting firms specializing in nonprofits to transition this program from Burnsville High School to the foundation. Because of the work he has done, the foundation is much better organized how it collects and distributes scholarship funds according to the IRS rules. When John began this project, the scholarship account was basically a large pot of money coming in and going out. Currently, every donor has a line item, and the funds are tracked very closely for each student and donor. John also spends many hours creating reports and meeting with the accounting firm. The impact of their work on the lives of 191 students and families cannot be overstated. We talk about each of our students finding and following their own path. Pat and John make essential contributions, removing barriers, and making those paths a little easier and a little more accessible for our students. Thank you so much. Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Mike and Sandy Driscoll of Glendale United Methodist Church to come to the podium. This last award recipient we'll recognize tonight is the Glendale United Methodist congregation. 4 years ago, 2 members of Glendale Methodist Church approached Principal Black at Hidden Valley Elementary School, sharing that they wanted to live out their mission of serving in their community and wanted to know how they could help. Since that time, church members have continued to be an active extension of the school in many ways. During the pandemic, Glendale UMC has been a particularly important partner when it came to ensuring Hidden Valley families had access to meals and healthy food. For instance, with just a few days' notice, Glendale stepped up to host an open-door pantry that was originally meant to be at Hidden Valley and organized volunteers to help pack and run it out to families in their vehicles. They then stepped up to deliver food directly to families who didn't have access to transportation. Glendale was nominated by Hidden Valley School social worker Megan Gower-Clues, who wrote that the Glendale congregation's can-do attitude and the ability to rally has been one of the biggest strengths for the school during this unprecedented time. Thank you, Mike and Sandy, and to the entire Glendale congregation for your amazing support. Oh, did you want to? Thank you. And that's the final award winner for this year, and I just want to close by saying that I'm constantly impressed by the volunteers in our community. Whether students, staff, parents, or residents, there is a spirit of service in 191 that makes us all proud to live here and be a part of District 191. Once again, thank you and congratulations to our 2022 John Coskran Volunteer Award winners. Oh, and Zoe, it's okay if you don't, you can leave too. It's okay. Thank you so much, Zoe.
Thanks so much again, Zoe.
Thank you,
for
Zoe.
being part of- taking part. Yes.
Thank you.
We'll see
Thank
you
you.
tomorrow at graduation.
Hopefully it won't rain.
Next, we'll move to the Committee of the Whole regarding Student Performance and Achievement Committee, World's Best Workforce, Reading by Grade 3. We have Amina Oftedal, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and Christine McDonald, CISA Elementary Curriculum Coordinator.
Chair Chester, Superintendent Battle, members of the board, I just want to thank you all for this opportunity to share One of the key indicators from the Minnesota Department of Education's World's Best Workforce. One of 5 indicators for schools, the goal all third graders can read at grade level is strongly grounded in research as a benchmark for student success throughout school. Joining me this evening is Christine McDonald, our elementary curriculum coordinator, and we will be providing an overview of the Read Well by Grade 3 requirements. We'll give you a snapshot of the third grade data this spring, and we're going to share the instructional response and support that we give to students. Not only is third grade reading an indicator for the world's best workforce, it is also found in Minnesota statute. It is the goal that every child meets the benchmark of reading at grade level by grade 3, and the legislature has outlined 3 basic obligations that schools must meet. The first is that we need to establish an assessment process that includes all students and provides a valid and reliable assessment tool that includes measure of student performance. So this valid and reliable measure of student performance, there are certain requirements that need to be in place for that, and we want to make sure that the tool that we're using is one that can be consistent, and so that we can see the trend and measure our progress over time as a system. The second requirement is really notifying families and partnering with them to support students in, and this is a necessary and valuable element of all academic programming, but it is specifically called out here, and that we use the process of not only report cards, parent-teacher conferences, other types of reading contracts, but really trying to make sure that parents understand how their child is doing in literacy, what that child's individual goal will be, and how parents can be partnering with the school, and how the school can partner with parents in order to support those children and their growth. And finally, it's also necessary to provide ongoing intervention and instruction for students until they do meet this benchmark. And so it is the requirement that we continue to provide that and measure that all the way through the student's matriculation. So the District Literacy Assessment Plan includes a suite of tools known as FastBridge. This tool is one that we started using in 2019, and it replaced the Ames Web measurement that was being used previously. The FastBridge assessment tools gives us a large suite of tools, not only in literacy, but also in math. And there's also an assessment included in that package for social emotional learning as well. So it does have a lot of broad tools. All of them come in the suite for a single price. And the tools also range in how they are administered. We use early reading for our kindergarten and our first grade students. This assessment is administered individually to each student. And it is really focusing on those essential reading skills because it's not expected that students come to kindergarten reading. It is expected, however, that we want to identify instruction that focuses on those early literacy skills. What are those things that students understand about reading and about language that gets them on the right path to be a reader by grade 3? And those can be things as simple as the concepts of print. Does a student understand how a book works? Can they hold the book right side up? Do they understand how the pages turn? Do they understand that there are pictures and text and that the words represent the story? And so those are some of the really foundational literacy skills that we want students to know. Can they identify the beginning sounds of things? When shown a picture, can they identify what sound that item starts with? If I show you a picture of a fish, can you identify that sound? And so those are the types of individual assessments that we do. Those assessments change from fall to spring to winter to become more complex and more reading ready throughout the school year. So at the beginning, we're checking to see, does the student understand how the book works, or how the words and pages actually function, and understand that relationship, to the spring, where we're asking them to identify perhaps some basic sight words. So there's a continuum. And so as the year progresses, the benchmark for where students should be performing increases in rigor as well. The second tool is the A reading. This is computer administered. It is also computer adaptive. And we use this assessment in grades 2 through 5. It is expected at that point that students have some basic reading comprehension skills, and this computer adaptive assessment measure changes in difficulty depending on how the students answer the questions. And so when a student responds, various questions are put into place until that student's exact proficiency level is identified. Because it is computer adaptive, it also means that students are given an individualized goal based on where their starting level is in the fall. So the teacher receives an individualized report for each, for growth and for targeted skill instruction for every student. And all students participate 3 times a year, in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring. The FastBridge suite also provides us with what we call progress monitoring tools, so that as students are taking part in intervention, the teacher can then administer a progress monitoring check to see how well that student has progressed in the last couple of weeks. That data then is all collected in one system, so that there is a clear report when we share with families to show where the student started in the fall, what the intervention was, and how they progressed at those different points. So really making sure that we have good, clear communication with families about how well their student is progressing. The spring data for this year, however, shows the students that we have, less than half of our students are meeting the grade level benchmark in 3rd grade. This graph represents 3rd graders in the final column, and then you have, you see each year the kindergarten 1st and 2nd grade and the assessments in which each of those are, were used. When we look at where students are in the fall and in green, and then you can see where they ended in the spring. So we do see some growth, but we do see the flat results in grade 3. So students who came in reading at grade level, we had the same percentage of students who leave reading at grade level. The indicators for grade level benchmarking is the 50th percentile according to national norms. So we want to make sure that we have that 3rd point, independent point of reference for how our students are performing on this test, along with the pool of students all the way across the nation taking this particular assessment. However, when we know that our students are coming in and many of them are performing below grade level in the fall, one of the things we do receive, and I mentioned it already, is that they get that individualized growth target based on where they started and what their grade level is. And so what we see, however, from our growth is that students, 60% or more of our students are making typical growth, like any student across the nation. Many of them are making aggressive growth, which is one of the requirements of the law. The statute indicates we should be providing intervention that accelerates our student growth. So we have to do, if we want students to meet benchmark and they are behind, we can't just do typical instruction. We also have to have instruction that accelerates their growth. And so one of the things that we're looking at is really seeing how our students are really making those growth targets. And so this is the average growth target of students who are meeting the growth targets for there. And so it really is a chance for teachers to use the data that they collect those 3 times a year and to then adjust interventions to match the specific skills that students are lacking and to grow them in that particular area. So we like to look at both pieces. We like to look at the proficiency target. That is an absolute necessary indicator for us to see how well our students are meeting that grade level benchmark. But we know with students who are behind the benchmark that having that typical and aggressive growth is very important in terms of an indicator. However, the data does not stand alone. The data is then used by us at the district level in collaboration with instructional building leadership teams in the buildings to respond and to see what kinds of pieces we can put into place. And so last year, as we looked at the results of our data coming out of the pandemic and coming out of hybrid learning, we knew that there were some things that needed to be established and addressed right away. I believe I sat before this group last year at this time, last spring, and indicated that our students were lacking in phonics and phonemic awareness instruction, and shared that we were using some different strategies in order to extend and to target that particular area of instruction. I'm going to ask Christine McDonald to share a little bit about the instructional programming that was put into place this year in response to the data from last spring and the results that we've had from some of those areas, some of those strategies, and then what things we're putting in place based on the data that we're seeing today.
Well, good evening. Thank you again for having me here, Board Chair Chester, Superintendent Battle, and fellow board members. Again, my name is Christine McDonald. I am the Elementary Curriculum Coordinator within the CISA department. And as stated, these next two slides that we will be looking at is really to discuss our instructional response to our student learning. And as you can see from the data we've reviewed, that we are seeing students, more than 60% of our students show typical to aggressive growth. However, at that national standard of 50th percentile, that's an area of needed growth. And so what are we going to do? How are we going to act and respond as educational leaders and classroom teachers to meet the needs of our students? And that's what's illustrated on these next two slides. The items listed are a marriage of both direct student instructional changes, but also instructional professional development for our teachers. So as stated in the beginning, we have what's called What I Need Time, or called WIN, and that is where teachers are using student data to meet the individual needs of our students, whether it's in various areas of needed growth that's identified in the assessments that were just mentioned. Paired with that, as a response to our student learning coming out of the pandemic, we extended what's called Being a Reader, which is whole group direct instruction on phonics and phonemic awareness. We've extended that this year into our 3rd through 5th grades to respond to the learning loss that occurred during the pandemic. But paired with that, on the instructional professional development side, this school year we had 2 schools, Hidden Valley and Sky Oaks, participate in a program called FAST for Success, which was a partnership with the University of Minnesota. And FAST for Success helped teach and instruct the teachers and building leaders on how to analyze their student data to make informed decisions on their instruction. Paired with that, we've had schools at a local level reach out to receive additional training from FastBridge, again, on how do I analyze the results of my student learning and make changes in my instruction. And, which may have been mentioned to you, this year we also piloted a phonemic awareness program called Hagerty Phonemic Awareness in 1 elementary school in 4 kindergarten classrooms. And that was in a direct response to the need of our students. And that's phonemic awareness is the ability, a student's ability to identify and manipulate individual sounds in our language. And this is a crucial and critical foundational skill to build reading proficiency for students. And at this small pilot, we saw tremendous success that we would like to repeat this pilot program for the upcoming school year, which I will speak to about in just a moment. Paired with all of these things that we've talked about, we've also continued our collaboration with Collaborative Classroom, which is the publisher that leads our reading curriculum to provide additional development for our teachers on what's called formative and summative assessments. Again, another access point for our teachers to gather data on our students so that we can respond appropriately. So speaking about how we're going to continue to respond to our student learning in our instruction for the 22-23 school year, we are going to continue with WIN, or What I Need Time, in our classrooms. We have, as I alluded to, we are extending the Hagerty Phonemic Awareness pilot to now 3 schools in both kindergarten and 1st grade for next year. And those 3 schools are Harry Bishop, kindergarten, 1st grade, Sky Oaks, and Hidden Valley. We're also continuing the FAST for Success programming. And again, we're extending that to 2 schools. So Hidden Valley, and Sky Oaks did phase 1 this past school year, and they're moving on to phase 2. And now we're also bringing on Ron Elementary School and Harriet Bishop for phase 1 of their year. I'm excited for this, is we are also doing it, bringing back our steering committee for literacy to our phase 5 of our steering committee to really examine what our student results have shown from us as we have adopted Making Meaning and Being a Reader from 2017, analyzing our results, what data do we have to support what elements of our practices are working and successful, and what elements of our practices are in an area of needed growth. And so, again, the Literacy Steering Committee is coming back together this summer and will extend through next school year, where we will be evaluating the essential skills that we deem all students need to know and be able to do before they leave their certain grade level. We are going to be working on our formative assessments to really align what it is we want our students to be able to do. And we're going to continue to address the curricular areas that need additional strength based upon our student results. Our end goal is that we want every student to be reading by 3rd grade, by the end of 3rd grade, and we believe with these efforts, both on the professional development side of our teachers and implementing high quality practices in our classroom, we will be achieving that goal.
And so just to thank you for taking the time today to look at this one indicator for the world's best workforce. I do want to say that it really has, to see these results and to see that students are continuing to move forward. We know these scores are higher than they were last year. It is very difficult for me to provide a valid representation of any trend data using the FastBridge tools. When the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments data is available, then that will at least give us some trend data that we can use prior to pandemic and after pandemic and kind of judge where we are at that time. But the first year that we used FastBridge was the 1920 school year, and so we weren't able to collect any spring data. And then last year, our teachers worked very, very, very hard to include as many students as possible, both remote and in person, in the FastBridge assessments. And this year, I feel like was a really solid administration in fall, winter, and spring. And I feel like this data is really establishes a strong baseline for us moving forward. And I wish I could say that we have a good solid trend over 3 years, but we just were not able to collect good, reliable trend data. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll open up to board members with questions, discussion. Director Werb?
I find this highly interesting because I have a 3rd grader. And she actually was very fortunate that she did not have setbacks during the pandemic. I had a very extensive conversation with her teacher during parent-teacher conferences, but had this conversation about the level of setback for other students. Mm-hmm. So I was aware of this, but is this like just this grade that had this level of noticeable setback? I guess I don't know. There's a lot of information here, so I don't know if I missed that part. So is the 3rd grade like one of the key indicators of where gaps were found because of the pandemic?
When we look at this class of 3rd graders, we need to recognize is that they are coming off of a year and a half of pandemic instruction. And our data last spring, and I shared it with the board here, showed that our students were holding really well. They weren't seeing significant losses, but that means that they were also not seeing significant growth. And so I think this, both our 2nd grade and our 3rd grade class are places where we need to continue to do some intensive work, especially when we recognize, as Christine McDonald has shared with us, that there are some gaps in some of those foundational literacy skills, and bringing our instruction that normally we would have in primary only grades into those grades to help support those students.
Okay. I do have another question. At one time, I know we were using Reading Corps. Are we still using them?
Yes, Reading Corps is still available. I think we even have recruiting signs out in the front of the building. So as many positions as we can fill with tutors,
Yep.
we use them.
And so we still use that as an intervention then?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to say more about that?
Minnesota Reading Corps is an intervention that is encouraged and offered for every public school in Minnesota. And so again, we are dependent on individuals applying for it, and they are highly trained by the program. So that is an intervention option in the schools that have the tutors. Yes.
And we have, do you know how many tutors we have?
It depends on the season. Some people, in the fall, we may end up with fewer. In the wintertime, we tend to see a few more folks that apply and are ready to move into the position. So I would say that we have probably 10 in the district at any given time.
And that's spread across all of the
That's spread
schools.
across.
Okay.
And so sometimes that number is higher. We could have up to 15, but for the most part, that's what it looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Other board members? Questions, discussion? Nope. Thank you very much. And it is understandable, though, with the gaps because of the pandemic, it's hard to have a full comprehensive assessment from year to year, realizing now that it's good to hear that we have kind of maybe a foundation to go off of with this year's data, and look forward to another report next year.
Thank you. I know this is the third time that my third spring sharing data with the board, and I feel very strongly that the vision that I had in that very first year when I started in last fall, we have the tools and the opportunity to make that move forward.
Great, thank you. Next, we'll move to the information portion of our meeting. We'll start with a report about the superintendent's evaluation with Scott Hume, our vice chair.
I'm going to take off my mask for this part. So on May 26, 2022, the ISD 191 School Board and Superintendent Dr. Teresa Battle met in a closed session for her annual review. The review consisted of 3 parts: essential duties of the superintendent, personal district-specific goals for the superintendent Battle, and an assessment of approximately 24 of the many elements outlined in the Minnesota School Board Association Superintendent Standards. There were 4 personal goals for Superintendent Battle during the 2021-22 school year. Goal number 1 was to improve competency in moving toward adaptation and cultural competency, as described by the Intercultural Development Continuum, linking knowledge of my culture and other cultures to increase skill of shifting perspectives and to link my cognitive ability to generate cultural appropriateness in my effective behavior. Goal number 2, increase knowledge and to strengthen connections with ISD 191 board members to have a highly collaborative and respectful relationship with them. Goal number 3, by January 22, provide leadership for the 191 roadmap, strategic directions, and dashboard to receive feedback. Complete draft for directors, staff, students, families, and community to review, provide feedback, and present draft of 191 strategic directions and dashboard by November 2021. Finalize strategic directions and dashboard by June of 2022. Goal number 4, by April 2022, present a gold standard performance system for the executive leadership team for the purpose of professional development about progress towards meeting individual goals aligned to district goals. As part of this evaluation process, Dr. Battle completed a self-assessment of her work over the last year, and individual board members did their own individual assessments of Dr. Battle's performance. Overall, there was considerable alignment between Dr. Battle's self-assessment and the average scores given by the board regarding her performance during the last school year. The overall alignment indicated that Dr. Battle has been meeting expectations in relation to her key duties as superintendent, in meeting her annual goals, and in aligning with MSBA standards in her work in leading the education of students in ISD 191. During her time in our district, including during this year's evaluation process, both the board and Superintendent Battle noted that Dr. Battle is especially effective at I skipped a sentence. Is especially effective at community relationship building, is highly approachable and visible in our schools and community, possesses a high level of professional knowledge of teaching and learning, and is a highly ethical and inclusive leader in her interactions with students, staff, and with all who live in our broad and diverse community. During the 2021-22 school year, as was also the case during the 2 prior school years, Superintendent Battle continued to successfully lead the district through the ongoing challenges of the pandemic, keeping the health and safety of our children and staff at the forefront of all decisions. During such unprecedented times, the board commends Superintendent Battle's leadership and her supportive work with our students, families, and communities in navigating these challenges. The board admires Dr. Battle's calm leadership style, her data and values-driven decision-making process, and her commitment to community engagement, as these assets are all essential for her success. Thank you, board members, for your work in completing this evaluation, and thank you, Superintendent Battle, for your leadership of our school district during the last year. And this concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Hume. Any other comments or from the board? Just thank you so much, Dr. Battle. It's been a pleasure to work alongside you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
I concur.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, we will have a report about amendment to revised FY22 budget for food and nutrition and community education. We have Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services, and another gentleman.
Good evening, Board Chair, Directors of the Board, and Dr. Battle, Superintendent. Tonight, I have Tyler Daney here as well as Director of Finance, as much of the work that you're going to see this evening related to the amended revised budget, as well as the next agenda item, is the work of him and his team as well. So as we get into this conversation around the Fiscal Year 2022 amended revised budget, this is a bit unique for us, although we did do this last year as well. What we have here is a recommendation to the board for approval of amending these 2 particular fiscal funds, within the current year's revised budget. As we take a look at the agenda, you can see that we're going to discuss food and nutrition budget, the community education budget. The general fund isn't really not mentioned here. I have it listed because I want to make a point of the fact that although we're not revising this budget, our assumption that our actuals will come in probably a little better than what we had projected in the budget still seem to hold true for us, but we're not at a point where we feel it's a significant amount to adjust at this time. As we move into the amendments that are being proposed, this is a recap of all funds that you can see listed here, including those funds that are not impacted. So as you take a look at these, the general, capital projects, debt service, and the internal service fund have no changes from the revisions. The revisions were brought to you in January, and as we take a look at these revisions that are being projected moving into the food service and the community services funds, I want to make note of the fact that much of this is about timing. And so, for instance, as you take a look at the food service fund that's being projected here, this is a summary, and you can see that the revenues are significantly projected to be higher than what we had at revised budget. So the difference between the revised budget and what we're amending here this evening with this proposed action is $872,201 more in revenue. When we did our revised budget in January, we had only 2 months recorded because there was a 2-month period of time in which the application could be made. And so we were that far kind of delayed in receiving that information. Too soon to really project exactly the impact for the full year. This is why we're here before you this evening, so that we can bring that to you, because we feel this is significant. Additionally, on the expenditure side, there is a slight increase there as well for $252,458. We have many reasons for these things we're going to talk about here in the next few slides. As you take a look at the revenues, these are the amended revenues in total, mostly federal in nature for our food service funds, which is typical now, but even more so this year. As I mentioned, the application being 2 months delayed, this is what's bringing us to this acknowledgement of these additional revenues at this time. For the expenditures, as we take a look at these by object, these are also amended expenditures you're looking at here. You'll see that the salaries and benefits are about 50% of the expenditures for food and nutrition, and another 42% is in food and milk alone. So that's significantly the bulk of what it is that you see in food and nutrition in the food service fund. So what are the reasons for this surplus? As we mentioned on the revenue, there's a number of these items listed. We're going to talk about each of these in a few more slides ahead. On the expenditures, we have all of these items listed, and we're going to discuss those too. As we take a look into the surplus for revenues, let's talk about seamless summer option versus the National School Breakfast and Lunch Program. All of this past year has been under the seamless summer option. And you'll see in the next slide here the fact that this increase in reimbursement can be anywhere from 25.5 cents per meal up to $4 per meal compared to the National School Breakfast and Lunch Program. So the next slide shows the reimbursement rates between those programs, and this is only for the current school year, and then you're looking at what the rates are for 2023 for the seamless summer breakfast and lunch. And so you can kind of see there's a year difference there, but essentially you can see the differences that are in place. It varies between free, reduced versus full paid for breakfast, for lunch, and so we're just kind of showing you the data. You can take a look at this at your leisure, and certainly if you wonder about anything, just let me know. As we take a look at the other reasons listed for the revenue changes, I do want to talk a little bit about meal participation. This past year has been free for all students. And so when that's the case, you can anticipate that there would be more participating. And we've seen that. Our grants, our Director of Food and Nutrition, Julie Kronebetter, she has done a phenomenal job of constantly reviewing and applying for certain grants that are applicable to our needs. Sale of equipment, selling that equipment that is no longer being used in some of our schools, particularly during the close of the schools. And on the expenditure side, we want to start talking a little bit about the labor. As is the case across many departments within our district, we have a shortage. And this year, we have been able to operate with a shortage of staff, some of which wasn't too difficult to do in some areas because, we didn't have as much of a labor-intensive approach. We didn't have pins. Students were having to record. All of that kind of made that a little bit easier. Some of how it is that we were able to produce and manage things were more centralized and handled in that fashion as well. So all the reasons here you can read as to why our labor costs are down this year as well. Moving on in the same area of expenditures, the menu planning, and trying to define menus that really made use of our commodities. Not only our commodities, but the commodities that were made available to us because other schools weren't utilizing their own, and so therefore they kind of turned theirs back in, and we had the opportunity to pick them up. And since our menus were high on the use of the commodities in order to feed all of our students, that worked very well for us and helped us to deal with any of the issues we had with our supply chain. Additionally, in the expenditure side, we've got a process that we utilize where we are a part of a buying group. And because of the volume in which we can purchase, that makes a big difference for us. And so that has been a very positive thing for us. Equipment and supplies and the grants, there are many grants that we've been able to receive. In fact, there's $24,000 for equipment and then $95,000 for federal supply chain assistance funds. Those dollars, though, are also resulting in some of those expenditures related to those grants being deferred into the next year because of the timing of things and the supply chain. So, that's just something where we know those expenditures are coming, but they're not probably showing in this year's. So that concludes the food and nutrition conversation, and we're going to now move to the Community Services Fund. This is, again, a summary page here for the revised versus the amended, and you can see the differences. On the community service, we have revenues that we anticipate increasing significantly at $271,500, largely due to federal funds. And in the expenditure side, we find that we actually have a lesser anticipated use of expenditures in the community service fund. And some of that is also related to federal relief funds that are in the general fund, but the expenditures eligible are actually being usually under the community service fund. But because they're eligible, because they're outside of the school day, outside of the school year, then they fall under the federal fund eligibility, and that's where they're going to get paid for during this school year, resulting in less expenditures in the community service fund. So the net result here on the community service fund is an increase to the fund balance there anticipated with this amendment of another $362,693. On those revenues, this is the amended slide for all revenues for community services. And here again, you can see that the percentages don't change very much at all from a typical year. There is a little bit more though on the federal percent at 4.5% and 291,000. On the expenditures, the next slide for object, this is by what type of expenditure is it? So when you're talking about salaries and benefits and people, you're talking about 80.7% of the entire community service fund is going to be in people. Some of the contracted services may also be people, but it's 10.7%. And the rest is much smaller, with supplies and other being around 6.5%, and then you have a small amount there for capital. So those are the expenditures in the community services fund, again, all amended, all in total. What are the reasons on the community education, community service fund? On the revenue, increased funding in the adult basic education and preschool. So there were one-time funds afforded in the adult basic ed. Those funds need to be used this year. They have just today been extended for 2 more months. So we have through August 31st. But for us, we anticipated having that spent by the end of this year, and so we anticipate that will be the case. For expenditures, we have the use of restricted federal funds, again, as I mentioned, eligible under the general federal funds, and so that's going to result in lesser expenditures under the community services fund. So the next steps related to this particular amendment, later this evening on your agenda, you have action recommended for approval of this amended revised fiscal year 2022 budget. It will change the areas of food and nutrition and community services fund. I'd like to take a moment as supervisor for these 2 departments, as well as the other 2 operational departments that throughout the last couple of years have been very, very hard at work. And I know that's said about a lot of everybody, right, during this pandemic season, but this is my opportunity to just mention the fact that in the areas of food and nutrition, that's led by Director Julie Kronebetter, community education led by Director Jason Sellers, our operations department led by Director Dave Lake, and our finance department led by Director Tyler Daney. All of these folks, they have put in an immense amount of work to make sure that during the last 2 years that we have been able to provide students, our families, the public with additional nutrition, extra programming, childcare, the maintenance and cleaning of our buildings during this time when everyone's concerned about safety, and the monitoring and the recording of all these federal funds. So just a moment for me to say thank you to them and to acknowledge the work that they have been doing, because I think it's been a bit more than the typical, right? And so with that, then I want to say thank you to you for the opportunity to bring this amended revised budget forward as well for this fiscal year, and that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Are there any discussion or questions from fellow members? Director Hume?
Yeah, I just had one probably quick question. Towards the end, I think it was slide 19, you were talking about the increased funding in the adult basic education and preschool.
Mm-hmm.
Is that state or federal funding, and is it one time, like, is it the COVID relief
Yep.
fund related? Okay, that's what I was assuming, but
Yeah, the adult basic ed is one-time federal funds, and the preschool is also federal funds, but I won't say one-time because this next year there's another increase. So
Okay.
you'll see it in the FY23 budget as well.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or discussion? No? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I suppose you stay, because we had gone to the next one, which is a report about the proposed FY '23 adopted budget, and we have Superintendent Teresa Battle, Dr. Teresa Battle, and Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services.
Thank you, Chair Chester and members of the board. I am pleased to present the proposed budget for the 2022-2023 school year. The budget reflects the priorities of the district and maintains class size targets set by the board. Lisa, you can go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Just opening. Thank you. It's up. We have priority investments in pathways pre-K-12, support for the achievement and integration goals, our equity plan, and strategic roadmap vision and core values. This budget affirms our priority to continue down the path we've created when it comes to instruction, programming, and services for our students. We want to continue to expand the pathway model so that it reaches all the way from pre-K to graduation. We want to continue to invest in early learning, specifically having voluntary pre-K at each elementary, and continue to focus on meeting the personalized needs of our students. We want to maintain class sizes, and we will continue to pursue equity and work toward becoming a culturally proficient school system. And we want to continue to support the student mental health and overall wellness. Board members, I thank you for your direction and guidance in the development of this budget. Also, I want to share my appreciation to parents, community member, and staff members who have responded to our online survey and gave feedback during parent meetings. Tonight's agenda, you will see, we will recap some of that budget development just briefly to remind our public. And then I will turn over the presentation to Lisa to go provide some numbers to you for the budget. I do want to note before we go through the slides, I must encourage our families, community members, and staff to review this board's legislative platform. And please share your thoughts about school funding with Governor Walz and legislatures. I want to emphasize we are grateful for the per pupil allocation we receive, but we continue to not get the inflationary increases to address the diverse needs of our learners, to continue to have competitive wages for employees, and to meet our rising operational costs. There is an increase projected in the fiscal year 23 budget for our cross-subsidy, and I would like to share those numbers with the board. The projected difference in inflation for our next school year, the cross-subsidy for special education, is $10,563,016. The cross-subsidy for English language services we also project to increase to $4,736,041. You will see tonight, you can go to the next slide, Lisa, that this budget will reflect the values that you put forward. And this budget includes a total of $135,328,560 in general fund revenue and a total of $137,139,540 in expenditures, with a variance of $1,810,980. This budget we project to include a fund balance of $27,560,918. We will also tonight share recommendations for use of federal release funds. We understand we must continue to rebound from the impacts of the pandemic. And so tonight, I will be asking the board to consider using $3.4 million of federal funds and to assign fund balance as of June 30th, 2022 in the amount of $1,810,980, which will allow a structurally balanced budget. Budget development goals, we believe that we have met those, just for review for the public. And we have employed several strategies that we've shared previously at regular board meetings as well as in workshops. Please take note that the board direction was to use no more than 1.845 million of fund balance or unassigned fund balance no lower than 14.11%. Prioritizing our instructional priorities. Earlier, you had a SPA report. We have set that goal to meet our third graders for reading. And as you heard, they gave some very specific strategies to help us meet that goal. Here you see the primary strategies for our pre-K-12 instructional priorities. And before I turn it on to Lisa, I would like to mention part of my role as superintendent is to look for external grants. You also hear that our staff members also look for external grants. You heard about Julie Cronenbetter from Food and Nutrition, our director, looking for grants. Here are some grants that we have secured. I'd like to thank Director Kathy Funston and all of the principals and other staff members who helped put several applications together, quite lengthy. And so you see there, people believe, external partners believe in the work we're doing. And so just that will also be a part of our budget. And then just a reminder of the engagement opportunities I mentioned earlier, thanking our parents for their work. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Executive Director Lisa Ryder to run through the numbers.
Thank you, Superintendent Dr. Battle. As we are accustomed to seeing, we have our all funds page that shows your total projected beginning fund balance, the revenue budget, the expenditure budget, and the projected ending fund balance for the fiscal year of 2022-2023. All funds are listed here. You will note that for the first time in 15 years, capital projects has 0 across the board. So we are anticipating that to be completely wrapped up in this fiscal year, and so next year's budget will not have any dollars identified for capital projects. As we go into this in some detail, to help people understand that when we receive revenue, much of our revenue can be restricted. And when that's the case, these are examples of those areas. So in the general fund, for example, we have capital funds that can only be used for capital purposes, for approved personnel and equipment that is according to state statute. Title funds, when we receive federal funds for title, they have very specific purposes and uses. And so we need to make sure that we're utilizing them in the fashion they're intended. Technology levy is another example under the general fund. This is something that we levy our taxpayers for. They're very generous in supporting us in this manner. And that too is also very specific as to where we can spend those funds, similar to the capital. The food and nutrition services, community education, and debt service are all separate from the general fund, but each of them are also tracked separately because they have their own restricted purposes and uses. Okay. As we move into the general fund, these next few slides are all about the general fund. So we're going to start with our revenues. This is the proposed adopted fiscal year 2022-2023 revenues. And as you can see, the amount is as Dr. Battle had listed earlier, and it's at the top of the slide. 65% is coming to us from state aid, 11% from federal aid, property taxes around 22%, and local revenues at 2%. I would say our federal aid is about double, 2 times the amount we typically see in pre-pandemic years. Moving into the expenditures for the general fund, this is by object. So here we're looking at things as to how are we using them. So you can see salaries and benefits alone are 80%, and we have contracted services listed at 14%. Smaller percentages for capital supplies and other. Here's the fact of the matter. When you're talking about contracted services, keep in mind it shows 18.7 million. But we know that of that amount, 8.5 million is transportation alone. Those are all people serving our families, even though they're contracted services. Similarly, we have substitutes that we contract for, but they're included as well in that number. Moving on to the next slide, this is taking the expenditures that are salary and benefits, our employees, and breaking down the various different bargaining groups that we have. So this is an entirely different kind of slice of those expenditures. It is showing a column for the FTEs, which is full-time equivalent. It's showing the summary of the salaries, the benefits, the total of those salaries and benefits, and then what percent of the total of this particular report does that make up for each of the different bargaining groups. There is a link as well that can take you to a further description of each of those different bargaining groups if you have wonderings around details about those specifics. So that's available. This is a point in time and a snapshot of what that can look like. It is not necessarily what it is exactly today, because that can shift, right? All right, moving on to the expenditures by program. So now we're taking a look at these same general fund expenditures, but we're looking at it by how are we using these expenditures? What exactly are they doing? So 76% is in the areas of instruction and instructional support. Then we have about 9% in maintenance services, 7% in our transportation, administration's around 4%, as is other. I will make note that the maintenance services also includes our long-term facility maintenance, because that's a part of the general fund as well and is significant. All right. Moving on to this next slide. All schools in the state of Minnesota are struggling. And part of the reason for this is the fact that we have an issue in that our general education formula is not keeping up with inflation. So this graph shows you, and we show this every year, but it shows you that if it had the CPI, consumer price inflation, attached to the formula each year, we would be at $7,789 per student. Whereas instead we are at $6,863. That gap is $926 per student per ADM. And so that is a huge amount for many districts. Keeping that in mind, as we take a look at our general education formula, I want to kind of explain how this works. So in our general education revenue, the formula itself generates 41.3% of our total general fund revenue, okay, 41.3. Of that, in a year in which we're going to receive a 2% increase, which is what our projected next year's budget shows, that formula then is $6,728, moving up to $6,863 per pupil. When you apply that increase with no change in our enrollment, meaning we're going to use the same number of kids we have right now, and we're going to apply that percentage increase, that would be about $1.134 million, okay? So that amount of just over $1 million is equal to not even 1%, but 0.83% of our current expenditures. But each year we can't just go with that. We have to apply our enrollment projections. And since our enrollment changes are declining compared to the current year in our projections, that adjustment then means that instead of the just over 1 million, we're looking at an increase to next year's revenue in the amount of $663,836. That is the equivalent of not 0.83 of 1%, but 0.49 of 1% increase from the current year's expenditures. So I just need to kind of make that clear, because when people hear 2%, they think it's 2% on everything. It's not. So it really breaks down to this. Okay, so how are we going to make this all work? Well, this year, we're going to rely upon some federal funds. And those federal funds are listed here under the general fund. So we're currently going to be utilizing 5 different federal relief grants in the general fund, included in the adopted budget for fiscal year 2023. Those dollar amounts are listed here, and you can see them. I'm sorry about the slide shifting a little there. I didn't catch that earlier, but the total amount in the general fund is $9,670,499 that we are projecting in this particular proposed adopted budget. Under the Community Education Fund, for the preschool programming is another $148,000. Attached to this particular slide and available for people interested is, let me see if I can get the mouse over there, the federal relief funds link. And if you go here, this will break down for you these various areas that we have mentioned that we're going to include in next year's budget. We are showing you some information on the left column that tells you what was the allocation to us, and in many cases, you're going to see 2 different years listed. So for the Finance Code 160, 161, which is our ESSER 3 funds, those we're going to use between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 is the plan. The board had guided us to use 50% in each year. So that's the intention. As you continue down the list, you can see then there's the Finance Code 161, which is also ESSER 3, but these are the funds that you can only use outside of the school year, outside of the school day. And so again, 50-50 between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24. Additionally, we have some funds that are identified for our expanded summer learning program. And so those funds are going to be used primarily in fiscal year 23. And this is an application our Director of Community Education had submitted, and we received $1.5 million for this. This is largely, our families experience this in our summer school programming, as well as our after-school programming that you see in the PALS programming, or I should say even EDGE, right, during the summer months, okay? So all of those are the eligible expenditures, but you would see us using these federal funds in those cases. Our summer preschool funding is identified under Finance Code 165. This will be primarily just the 23 fiscal year, $148,000. This is going to be similar to what we did last summer with other funds of the same nature. And so our preschoolers will again have that summer programming. Moving to the last 2 listed here, we have our learning recovery applications for the ESSER 3-5%. We started using some of that this year for tutoring purposes and mentoring, and we're going to continue to do that in the fiscal year 2023. And then the last one listed is the pandemic enrollment loss funding. We are utilizing a portion of that this year, included in this year's budget. And then the remainder of that amount is being identified for next year's budget. As we finalize the current year, some of these funds may be unused, and they would then roll forward in the revised budget next year. But at this time, we've already dedicated them this year, so we're not going to double count them. Okay, so that helps you understand some of those federal funds that we are currently planning to use. And now I got to find my way back here. I'm sorry, let me see here. Just struggling with, there we go. Thanks. The magic of someone behind the scenes. Appreciate that. All right, the general fund budget comparative summary. Here is the general fund, what we call our current reality. You see me present this in all the proposed meetings we've had up to this point related to this next year's budget. I have 4 columns of numbers. The first column on the left is going to be our actual audited results that were from fiscal year 2021. When we take a look at the adopted budget for the current year, as well as the revised budget for the general fund, you can see that comparison there in the next 2 columns that are listed. The last column to the right is the proposed adopted budget that you see for fiscal year 2022-2023. You'll notice that we start with the beginning fund balance on each of those columns, and then we're going to show the revenues. When we show the revenues, we're showing the revenues that are not the federal relief funds, and then we're breaking down the federal relief funds for that which was for things that we already have as current costs, and those things that we are adding something to our system and considering that new costs. Okay? On the expenditures, similarly, you will see that breakdown again. Expenditures in general that are typical outside of the federal relief funds, and then you would see the federal relief funds that are for the new costs. If they're already for our current costs, then they're embedded in that expenditure line. Does that make sense? And so as you take a look and compare these, you can see that for the current year, when we started this current year, we had an adopted budget that you approved that had a difference of $5 million between revenues and expenditures. We revised that, bringing it nearly balanced, is our anticipation, right? For next year's adopted budget, as Dr. Battle had mentioned, you gave us some guidelines. You said to try and get this so that our revenues compared to expenditures would be less than the $1,845,000. We met that possibility here in this proposed budget. This indicates a $1,810,980 difference between revenues and expenditures. What isn't necessarily matching up exactly with the guidelines, and it was an or, but it is in the unassigned fund balance. And I want to explain why that is. So your dollars are about the same, but in some of the areas that we were reducing, we were actually reducing in areas that are restricted. Remember when we talked about that? So when it's restricted, it's going to increase the restricted or committed fund balances, but not necessarily bring up your unassigned fund balance. So that's why our percentage of the unassigned fund balance is showing slightly lower than the 14.11 we had in mind, and instead it's calculating at the 12.67. Dollars are the same, but the percentage is calculating out a little different. Okay? So you can see if you look at the revised budget, you'll also notice that I have here assigned 1.810980, and that is the exact same amount that you're projecting as a negative amount deficit, right, for the next year's budget. The definition of the board assigning fund balance is you taking action to set aside that money from current fund balance for purposes of covering the next year's projected deficit. You would do that in action that would come before you at the next board meeting, and it would be calculated during the audit process, the total fund balance, but you would be assigning a portion of that for the audit records for purposes of using it for the next fiscal year. And that is the ask before you included in this proposed adopted budget for fiscal year 2023.
That was the next slide, right?
We've kind of covered this one in my conversation. Other resources that we have made available to you, this is typical for us. I will just pull them up because we have made a slight change in things. Tyler has gone ahead and aligned this a little differently, so you can actually see the payroll expenses versus the non-payroll expenses. So we hope that you find that useful when you look at this on a per budget unit basis. And our budget units, keep in mind, only break our budget down a little bit differently so you can kind of tell how much exactly is in general elementary instructional support. And what does it look like for middle school? What does that look like in comparison to the high school? So that breaks that down. It also shows you the dollar amounts in the adopted budget that's being proposed and the adopted FTEs that is reflected in that process. So you have a small description there as well, and you can, this goes for the entire total amount of the general fund, breaking it down by each of the different budget units. And as we get down to the bottom, you will see that we have that $137,139,540 listed in the third column over of numbers, and the total number of FTEs being 1,012.77 because we're doing full-time equivalents. And this is all employees, regardless of bargaining group, right? With that in mind, okay, now I got to go back again.
Just one note,
Yes.
it also includes the middle school athletics, $243,000. So wanted to mention that we did include that also.
They're taking over. There we go. And then there's another link in here for the staffing by budget unit. This lists all of our different positions by budget unit. It does include the location of where staff are and their names and their FTEs. Keep in mind, this is most reflective of the positions themselves. People will move around and things will happen with people's decisions, but the positions themselves is really what's being represented here in the budget units and the FTEs. Okay? All right. See if I got this figured out. Resume. Yep. Okay. We're going to now move away from the general fund and into the other funds. Our food service fund, we're projecting a beginning fund balance as you see listed with revenues and expenditures and a nearly balanced anticipated change in fund balance for the food service, largely due to the fact that we will be moving away from the seamless summer option over to the National School Breakfast and Lunch Program. And so that additional revenue that we've been seeing, we probably won't see next year. Moving on to the breakdown of this revenue, the percentages are very similar still, but it breaks it down as to how much. Food and nutrition, our food service fund is largely federally funded. And so as a result of that, there's also a lot of restrictions that go with it. So, and you'll see that more with the National School Lunch Program and the breakfast program. Moving into the expenditures by object, you will see that 51% again is in salaries and benefits, and 41% is projected to be in food and milk, with the rest of it being in other supplies and capital expenditures. Our community service fund, moving on to that particular fund, we still continue to anticipate an increase in that fund balance. And this is again largely due to the expenditures being eligible under so much of the revenue that we've received in the federal relief funds under the general fund. As we take a look at those revenues within the community service, you will find that the breakdown again is very similar. Property taxes, about 25% of their revenue received in community service comes from our taxpayers in Levy, 27% from state aid, and other local revenues is 45%. So there's a very small 3% coming from federal aid. Under the expenditures for community service, when you're taking a look at these, we wanted to show you them side by side for the type of expense as well as them by program. So for the type of expense, you're going to see that on the left side, people and benefits, salaries and benefits, for people, 82%. Okay, it's largely what community service does. It's serving our public. When we talk about the community service fund and we look at it by program, you can kind of see what types of programs were functioning for community service. So we have adult basic education, adult services, and senior center, $1 million. Okay, and so that there alone, you can see listed separate from the Project Kids, Edge, and kindergarten readiness, which is separate from school readiness. That's preparing our students for that kindergarten level. And our preschool and ECFE is tracked separately along with our early childhood screening. There is a portion that is for youth enrichment, and general speaking, that's like what's provided by Levy, so that we can just function as a department. So that covers a lot of the, what you might consider overhead of the department and a lot of your people. All right, our last fund is the debt service fund. And so here, keep in mind that we are always levying by statute 105% of the anticipated principal and interest of our debt schedule. And that debt schedule is laid out for us every time we sell bonds or we have any refunding of those bonds. So as noted here, there is a significant $905,000 change in fund balance. Again, that's that 5% that we're talking about. For next steps, this is on the agenda for our next board meeting for the board to consider the recommendation to approve the fiscal year 2023 budget, making that our adopted budget for the next school year. And with that, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Lisa. Any comments, questions from fellow board members? Oh, see. Oh, Director Hugh.
I'm 90% sure I know the answer to this, but it's one of those, if I don't ask it, someone else will. On the budget unit spreadsheet that you had the link to in the slideshow, on the first page, there are the instructional substitutes for middle school and the high school, where the payroll expenses are very small compared to the non-payroll expenses. May I safely assume that is because we use the teachers on call and we're paying them directly, so it's not considered a payroll expense?
Right, so we do keep separate budget units for our sub-costs, and so you'll find that for each of the elementary, the middle, and the high school, you're gonna have two different budget units, one which is for our employees, and then that's where you're seeing the non-payroll being zero. And then for those in which we're talking subs, there can be sometimes our own teachers who are covering courses in which we do have some, or a long-term sub that we consider our employee.
Which is why there's
Which
some
is
money.
why there's
in the-
some payroll, yep, and yet the others are all the non-payroll because they're contracted through, yes,
That is exactly what I thought. Thank you
Yep.
for confirming.
yes.
Any other questions, comments? Nope. Thank you so much. We look forward to having this back at our next week's meeting.
All right, thank you.
Next, we will have a report from Superintendent Dr. Teresa Battle.
Thank you, Chair Chester and members of the board. Here we are, the last day of school. Year is complete. This week, every year, is a time of celebration for our students, staff, and families, especially for those students who are moving on to the next stage of their personal journeys. I want to share a little bit about the celebrations taking place this week. On Tuesday, the Burnsville-Eagan-Savage Transitions Program held its graduation ceremony, celebrating 13 students who have developed the skills they need to reach their employment, post-secondary, and independent living goals. And after the ceremony, each student shared their portfolio with their resume, their interests, and plans for the future. On Wednesday, Adult Basic Education held its celebration event honoring students for all types of accomplishments, including 6 students who graduated from the Certified Nursing Assistant Program, 9 from the Parapro Program, 2 who earned their general equivalency diplomas, and 16 who became U.S. citizens this year. And tonight, 88 students received their high school diplomas from Burnsville Alternative High School. Tomorrow, 39 Virtual Academy graduates will be celebrated in a virtual ceremony, and 543 students will graduate from Burnsville High School at our Pate Stadium. So this is really amazing to think about. Hundreds of people achieving something wonderful and life-changing over the course of a couple of days. Each person has their own unique story about how they got here, and each ready to continue down their next path. At the same time, we must recognize no one gets to a point of accomplishment alone. Each student future ready, community strong. Earlier, you had the Coskran Awards, and we saw some community members as well as our own student who give back tremendously. And our mission is on display this week for sure. These events happen every year, each time at this time of year. They warm my heart and remind me of the essential role that public education plays in the lives of individuals, families, our community, and the entire nation. What we do matters. Some days and weeks we may not see so clearly the impact we have. But on weeks like this, it is so clear and powerful, and I'm proud to be a part of it with all of you and everyone in the 191 community. I am your very proud superintendent, and that concludes my report for tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. We'll open it up to other board member reports. This is not our committee report time. That'll be next meeting, but if there's other reports board members have. Seeing none, I just want to add that many of us have been attending these graduations and other ceremonies, and I know it is such a treat for us to be able to celebrate with our students and families in the community too. Next, we will move on to the business portion of our meeting, starting with our consent agenda. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. In the event a board member wishes to discuss an item, that item will be moved for separate consideration. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Director Connor,
Second.
second by Director Werb. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries unanimously. Next, we'll move on to new business and approve the strategic roadmap, strategic directions with Dr. Teresa Battle, Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Chester and members of the board. Tonight, I bring forth the recommendation that you adopt the 4 following strategic directions as part of the ISD 191 Strategic Roadmap. Creating space and opportunity for each and every voice to be heard. Actively leading by developing and sustaining a diverse and equitable education system. Supporting and leveraging innovation to improve student outcomes and district culture. Engaging our community to ensure common understanding of our strategic roadmap and the district work to support it. The vision and core values were developed during the 2021 school year, and this board adopted in May 2021.
Thank you. Do I have a do I have a motion to approve the strategic roadmap?
So moved.
Moved by Director Seed, second by Director Hume. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next, we will approve amendment to revised FY22 budget for food and nutrition and community education. We bring back Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services.
So as we talked about earlier, all of the details related to the amended revised budget for fiscal year 22 is now before you for action. So the request is for the board to approve that amendment to the revised budget for the fiscal year 2022.
Do I have a motion to approve this recommendation?
So moved.
Moved by Director Hume,
Second.
second by Director Werb. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next, we will, make sure I'm following here, approve long-term facility maintenance with ISD 917. Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services.
Thank you. There is a resolution included in this action item that is prepared for us by 917, Intermediate School District 917. Similar to us, they have a long-term facility maintenance program. But our 917 Intermediate does not have the ability to levy taxpayers, as they don't have taxpayers of their own. Instead, their member districts is who they need to work through. So every year, we bring forward a resolution that allows you to authorize our proportionate share of their long-term facility maintenance programs, since we are a member district of 917. So the resolution does include the fact that all of the members must approve that. Each of the different schools must approve that. And then in addition to that, the amounts that are included then are on our Pay 23 levy, which we will begin that process this summer. And you will be seeing that before you in September and again in December for you to finally approve that. The funds that are received from taxpayers under the long-term facility maintenance program and any levy program come to us in 23, but we use them for the fiscal year 23-24. Okay? So that's how that typically works. This does require that it's an annual levy and that we're not selling bonds for this purpose. And that really encompasses the resolution portion of the packet for this particular item. You have attached an Appendix A, which shows the breakdown of the $188,700 that our Intermediate 917 plans to spend in fiscal year 24, and it shows kind of how that would be spent. And then you have Exhibit B, which shows the breakdown and the calculation for our proportionate share. And you can see the list of the member districts there also. So with that, the recommendation is for the approval, the recommendation is that the Board of Education adopt the resolution of Intermediate School District 917 Long-Term Facility Maintenance Program budget.
Do I have a motion to approve this resolution? Not the resolution. What is it, the resolution?
Adopt the resolution.
Adopt the resolution. Moved by Director Said. Second by Director Miller. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next, we will move to approve long-term facility maintenance for ISD 191. Director Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services.
Thank you. I'm being joined by Director Dave Lake as well, as this plan involves quite a bit of work of the planning for the next 10 years. You have that attached to your board packet with 10 years of information for 2024 fiscal year, all the way through 2032, 2023, 2033. Can you believe we're into the 30s? So with this, Dave's breaking down for you in each of those years, the projects and also the sites at which that would be anticipated. The 1 year that we are including in our application for the levy process is essentially the fiscal year 2024. That is going to be a part of our pay 23, similar to the 917 we just talked about. What we need to do is submit an application which lists the expenditures not by project like you see in these 10 pages, but rather in an Excel file that basically lists the 10 years across. And then we have to break down those long-term facility maintenance projects into things like building envelope, how much is electrical, how much is mechanical, and things like that. Things that are kind of difficult to kind of tell. So Dave helps me to come up with those estimates with regard to those dollar amounts. Each time we bring this forward to you, the projects that we are planning to do, for instance, this summer, which is part of our fiscal year 23 and was a part of the pay 22. So you can see how we're talking 3 years out for some of what Dave's planning, and in many of these years way out, that's not going to be as reliable, right? That's all going to shift and change. So the focus is on the fiscal year 24. There is a recommendation that lists the detail and the history behind the long-term facility maintenance. We've always been able to have alternative facility projects for the last 15 years, but they shifted that in 2017, where now it's a long-term facility maintenance program that's available to all districts in the state. And so as part of that then, tonight we're asking for your approval. I would make mention of the fact that when we put this information into the levy system, you, in September, will also have new numbers for enrollment. We'll know more information about the growth of our community or what's projected, and we'll have more information of the impact of the negative adjustments we might have from past years, because it always takes 2 years to kind of hit the next cycle in the levy. And so all of that comes together in those levy sheets that you get in September. And when that happens, what has been the case for us in the last few years is that you have some room there in which you have the opportunity to address some of the long-term facility projects without necessarily impacting taxpayers negatively. And so with that, I would anticipate that you might very well have before you the long-term facility maintenance project plan, potentially again with some slight revisions if there's significant room. So we'll see how that looks in September, but for right now, I have to have something approved by the board and submitted to MDE by July 31st. So before you tonight is the recommendation that the Board of Education adopts the resolution approving the revised long-term facility maintenance program budget for fiscal year 2024.
Do I have a motion to approve the recommendation of adopting this resolution?
So
Moved by Director Miller,
Second.
second by Director Connor. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next, we will move to approve the employment contract for Superintendent of Schools. It has been an honor working alongside Dr. Battle these last 3 years as her current contract comes to an end at the end of this month on June 30th. And it is the recommendation that the Board of Education enters into a contract with Dr. Teresa Battle in conformance with Minnesota Statute 123B.143 for a term of 3 years commencing on July 1st, 2022 and ending on June 30th, 2025. And in our board packet and agenda, you can see any summary of the changes related to this contract, if you would like to look at that. Hearing that, do I have a motion to approve the employment contract for Superintendent of Schools?
So moved.
Moved by Director Hume. Second by Director Said. Any discussion?
I just want to say how pleased I am that we've reached this agreement to keep you for another 3 years. Throughout your tenure, you've been a fierce advocate for our students, and you've worked tirelessly to strengthen the results and the perception of our district, even in the face of an ongoing pandemic that has defined more than 2 of the 3 years that you've been with us so far. So thank you for all you have done so far, and I look forward to working with you as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Battle.
Yes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Congratulations. Your work's not done.
Thank you very much.
Next, we will approve on a first reading basis changes to policy 616, school district system accountability. We have Amina Oftedal, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment.
Members of the board, policy 616 is our systems accountability policy. It is the policy that has established our SASIAC committee, which is our public engagement committee for curriculum and instruction. It is also the committee that serves as the advisory to the Achievement Integration Plan, and serves as a member of the members serve as part of the multi-district collaborative council for achievement and integration. So the changes to this policy are few. They just bring us in alignment with the operational portions of the policy from MSBA and include some updated legislative language.
Do I have a motion to approve on a first reading basis changes to policy 616, school system accountability?
So moved.
Moved by Director Werb. Second by Director Said. Any discussion?
I have a question.
Director Hume.
I was just a little confused when I was reviewing this the other night, so I just want to share what I was confused about. So section 4A, the school district goals section, talks about the advisory committee. And then in section 2, it refers to the advisory committee as being established by the school board to ensure active community participation in all phases of planning and improving the instruction and curriculum affecting state and district academic standards. That's all fine and good, but it doesn't define what this advisory committee is until later in the policy. So for me, it would have been helpful to just, be clearer earlier in the policy that it's the SASIAC committee that we're referring to. So I don't know if that's something that should go back to the policy committee or if it's something, I don't know how that works, but.
I can answer that.
Okay.
I believe that we can bring it for the second reading with the changes. So we could actually put the SASIAC, spell out the words as it is under C, Student Achievement and Systems Improvement Advisory Committee.
Just have it earlier. I think that would be very
Earlier.
helpful
Yes.
for,
Exactly.
if I didn't
For the
catch
protocol.
that, then I'm sure that someone in the public looking at the policy on the website would have a hard time with it as well.
Yeah, isn't a significant change in the
Right.
meaning of the policy, but it does bring clarity, and it's a term that's already existing within the policy.
But we'll
So I-
verify that.
Super. Okay. That's my one question.
So with that change noted for the second reading, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank
you. And this concludes the regular portion of our school board meeting. Good night. Oh, do I need a motion? I don't need to.
We already
Nope, I do
approved the
not.
agenda.
There we go.
That's how I remember when I was chair.